fairy morals, the provision of Bibles for the heathen, or the efficacy of a new sort of soap. In an attempt to circumvent this problem, I've chosen an extract from the first edition, which describes the beginning of Simonella's extraordinary career. We can but hope that it bears some sort of relation to what actually happened. In the years that followed Waterloo, dealings between the Sidhe, fairies, and the British increased. British politicians debated the fairy question this way and that, but all agreed it was vital to the national interest. Yet, if these stories demonstrate nothing else, it is the appalling unpreparedness of the average 19th century gentleman when he accidentally stumbled into fairy. The Duke of Wellington is a case in point. Women do seem to have fared somewhat better in these perplexing circumstances. The heroine of Mrs. Mab, Venetia Moore, consistently demonstrates an ability to intuit the rules of fairy, which the older and more experienced Duke is quite without. Tom Brightwind, or How the Fairy Bridge Was Built at Thoresby, remains a tale replete with interest for the student of fairy. However, I see no reason to revise my earlier assessment of the story given in 1999, and deserving, I think, to be more widely known. The reader will find it prefacing the tale itself. I've chosen to finish with a story from that wonderful writer, John Waterbury, Lord Portishead. Apart from the period, 1808 to 1816, when he was under the thumb of Gilbert Norrell, Waterbury's writings, and in particular his retelling of old tales of the Raven King, are a continual delight. John Usglas and the Cumbrian Charcoal Burner is an example of that genre of stories much loved by the medievals, in which the rich and powerful are confounded by their social inferiors. I'm thinking here of the tales of Robin Hood or the ballad King John and the Abbot of Canterbury. In medieval northern England, no one was richer or more powerful than John Usglas, and consequently northern English folklore abounds with tales in which Usglas tumbles down holes in the ground, falls in love with unsuitable ladies, or for various complicated and unlikely reasons finds himself obliged to cook porridge for harassed innkeepers' wives. The sad truth is that nowadays, as at all periods of our history, misinformation about fairy assails us from every side. It is through stories such as these that the serious student of chic culture may make a window for herself into fairy and snatch a glimpse of its complexity, its contradictions, and its perilous fascinations. James Sutherland, Aberdeen, April 2006.
The Ladies of Grace Adieu. Above all, remember this, that magic belongs as much to the heart as to the head, and everything which is done should be done from love or joy or righteous anger. And if we honor this principle, we shall discover that our magic is much greater than all the sum of all the spells that were ever taught. Then magic is to us as flight is to the birds, because then our magic comes from the dark and dreaming heart, just as the flight of a bird comes from the heart. And we will feel the same joy in performing that magic that the bird feels as it casts itself into the void. And we will know that magic is part of what a man is, just as flight is part of what a bird is. This understanding is a gift to us from the Raven King, the dear king of all magicians, who stands between England and the other lands, between all wild creatures and the world of men. From the book of the Lady Catherine of Winchester, 1209 to 1267, translated from the Latin by Jane Tobias, 1775 to 1819. When Mrs. Field died, her grieving widower looked around him and discovered that the world seemed quite as full of pretty young women as it had been in his youth. It further occurred to him that he was just as rich as ever, and that, though his home already contained one pretty young woman, his niece and ward, Cassandra Parbringer, he didn't believe that another would go amiss. He didn't think that he was at all changed from what he had been, and Cassandra was entirely of his opinion, for, she thought to herself, "I am sure, sir, that you were every bit as tedious at 21 as you are at 49. So Mr. Field married again. The lady was pretty and clever, and only a year older than Cassandra, but, in her defence, we may say that she had no money, and must either marry Mr. Field or go and be a teacher in a school. The second Mrs. Field and Cassandra were very pleased with each other, and soon became very fond of each other. Indeed, the sad truth was that they were a great deal fonder of each other than either was of Mr. Field. There was another lady who was their friend. Her name was Miss Tobias, and the three were often seen walking together near the village where they lived, Grace Adieu, in Gloucestershire. Cassandra Parbringer, at 20, was considered an ideal of a certain type of beauty to which some gentlemen are particularly partial. A white skin was agreeably tinged with pink. Light blue eyes harmonized very prettily with silvery gold curls, and the whole was a picture in which womanliness and childishness were sweetly combined. Mr. Field, a gentleman not remarkable for his powers of observation, confidently supposed her to have a character childishly naive and full of pleasant feminine submission, in keeping with her face. Her prospect seemed at this time rather better than Mrs. Field's had been. The people of Grace Adieu had long since settled it amongst themselves that Cassandra should marry the rector, Mr. Henry Woodhope, and Mr. Woodhope himself did not seem at all averse to the idea. "Mr. Woodhope likes you, Cassandra, I think," said Mrs. Field. "Does he?" Miss Tobias, who was also in the room, said, "Miss Parbringer is wise and keeps her opinion of Mr. Woodhope to herself." "Oh," cried Cassandra, "you may know it if you wish. Mr. Woodhope is Mr. Field, stretched out a little to become more thin and tall. He is younger, and therefore more disposed to be agreeable, and his wits are rather sharper. But when all is said and done, he is only Mr. Field come again." "Why, then, do you give him encouragement?" asked Mrs. Field. "Because I suppose that I must marry someone, and Mr. Woodhope has this to recommend him, that he lives in Grace Adieu, and that in marrying him I need never be parted from my dear Mrs. Field. It is a very poor ambition to wish to marry a Mr. Field of any sort," sighed Mrs. Field. "Have you nothing better to wish for?" Cassandra considered. "I have always had a great desire to visit Yorkshire," she said. "I imagine it to be just like the novels of Mrs. Radcliffe." "It is exactly like everywhere else," said Miss Tobias. "Oh, Miss Tobias," said Cassandra, "how can you say so? If magic does not linger in Yorkshire, where may we find it still? Upon the moors, beneath the stars, with the king's wild company. That is my idea of Yorkshire." "But," said Miss Tobias, "a great deal of time has passed since the king's wild company was last there, and in the meantime Yorkshiremen have acquired toll gates and newspapers and stage-coaches and circulating libraries and everything most modern and commonplace." Cassandra sniffed. "You disappoint me," she said. Miss Tobias was governess to two little girls at a great house in the village called Winter's Realm. The parents of these children were dead, and the people of Grace Adieu were fond of telling each other that it was no house for children, being too vast and gloomy and full of odd-shaped rooms and strange carvings. The younger child was indeed often fearful and often plagued with nightmares. She seemed, poor little thing, to believe herself haunted by owls. There was nothing in the world she feared so much as owls. No one else had seen the owls, but the house was old and full of cracks and holes to let them in, and full of fat mice to tempt them, so perhaps it were true. The governess was not much liked in the village. She was too tall, too fond of books, too grave, and, a curious thing,